The massive transport ship hummed quietly as it approached the Federation peacekeeping station Beta 7. Inside, Private James Miller sat alone in the passenger compartment, his worn boots propped up on his duffel bag as he flipped through a technical manual. The other passengers, all from various alien species, had chosen to sit as far from him as possible. He didn't mind. After 3 years of serving in mixed species units, Miller was used to this treatment. Humans had a reputation that preceded them. Deathworlders, they were called. Species that evolved on planets that would kill most sentient life in minutes. A blue-skinned attendant, moving with the characteristic smoothness of the gentle world species, approached him with visible nervousness. "Sir, we're about to dock. Please secure yourself properly." Miller smiled and put his feet down. "Thank you," he said softly, careful not to show his teeth. He had learned early on that many species found human teeth disturbing. The attendant quickly retreated, their shoulder frills twitching with anxiety. The docking process was smooth, almost imperceptible. Miller gathered his belongings and waited for the other passengers to exit first. No need to make them more uncomfortable by walking close to them in the narrow corridor. As he stepped onto the station, a small floating drone approached him. "Private James Miller, Human, Combat Engineer Corps," it announced in a metallic voice. "Please follow guidance lights to Command Center." Green lights began pulsing along the floor, and Miller followed them through the sprawling station. The corridors were wide and tall, designed to accommodate species of all sizes. Some sections had different atmospheric compositions, sealed behind transparent barriers. Miller passed by creatures that looked like floating crystals, others that resembled Earth's manta rays, and some that were barely visible clouds of gas. The command center's door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, a tall figure stood at a holographic display. Captain Blue. Miller had read about his new commanding officer. The captain belonged to a species known for their tactical brilliance and extreme sensitivity to environmental changes. "Private Miller reporting for duty, sir," Miller said, standing at attention. Captain Blue turned, his elongated head tilting slightly. "At ease, Private." His voice was melodious, like wind chimes. "Your transfer papers are interesting. 3 commendations for maintaining equipment under extreme conditions, but also several notes about concerning behavior during crisis situations." Miller kept his face neutral. He knew what was coming. "It says here that during the asteroid mining incident, you continued routine maintenance while the station was being pelted by debris." Captain Blue's head tilted to the other side. "And during the solar flare emergency, you were found sleeping in your quarters instead of in the radiation shelter." "Yes, sir. The debris was following predictable patterns and avoiding our section. As for the solar flare, our quarters had sufficient shielding. I checked the readings myself." The captain's skin rippled with colors. A sign of confusion, Miller had learned. "You understand that this is an active war zone, Private. The 2 most powerful civilizations in this sector are fighting a proxy war right outside our windows." "Yes, sir. I read the briefing." "And this doesn't concern you?" Miller chose his next words carefully. "Sir, I'm trained to assess actual threats versus perceived ones. I'll neither panic unnecessarily nor ignore real danger. That's what makes humans good engineers. We can work under pressure." Captain Blue stared at him for a long moment. "Very well. You'll be assigned to Maintenance Team 4. They're somewhat understaffed at the moment. The last 3 engineers requested transfers due to stress." "Understood, sir. When do I start?" "Right now. Take an hour to store your belongings in your quarters, then report to Section 8G. And Miller." "Sir?" "Try not to disturb the other crew members with your resilience. They find it unsettling." Miller nodded and left the command center. As he walked to his assigned quarters, a distant boom echoed through the station's hull, some kind of weapons fire from the battle outside. While other beings in the corridor froze or rushed for cover, Miller barely noticed it. He had work to do, and a little warfare wasn't going to stop him. After all, he thought with a slight smile. He'd slept through worse during basic training. Miller's first week at Maintenance Team 4 was going smoothly until the orbital debris hit. He was deep in the station's maintenance tunnels, fixing a faulty air recycler when the first pieces struck the station's outer hull. The impact wasn't much, just a gentle vibration through the metal walls. But through his communication earpiece, Miller heard panic break out. All personnel to emergency shelters. The station's AI announced. Debris field approaching. This is not a drill. Miller checked his tablet, pulling up the station's external cameras. Fragments of destroyed ships were drifting toward them, leftovers from the latest battle between the warring aliens. He studied the debris pattern and did some quick math in his head. His earpiece crackled. Engineer Miller. Captain Blue's voice was higher than usual. Why aren't you moving to the shelter? Sir, the debris field is spreading in a predictable pattern, Miller replied, continuing to work on the air recycler. Based on its trajectory, none of the major pieces will hit this section. Also, this recycler needs to be fixed in the next 20 minutes, or Section 8G will have air quality issues. There was a long pause. You calculated this while working? Yes, sir. Standard orbital mechanics. We learned it in basic training. Miller tightened a bolt, then checked the pressure gauge. Anyone who's worked space construction back on Earth deals with this kind of thing regularly. Another impact rattled the station. Through the comm system, Miller could hear various alien crew members making sounds of distress. Miller, a new voice, joined the channel. It was Dr. Green, the station's chief psychologist. Your vital signs are remarkably stable. Are you using some kind of human meditation technique? Miller suppressed a chuckle. No, ma'am. This is just Tuesday for me. Back home, I used to repair mining rigs during asteroid storms. This is actually pretty calm in comparison. The debris impacts continued for another 10 minutes. Miller finished fixing the recycler, tested it, and was already halfway through his routine maintenance checklist when the all-clear signal sounded. When he emerged from the maintenance tunnel, he found a small crowd waiting for him. Dr. Green was there, along with several other alien crew members. Their various appendages were still trembling from the recent excitement. Fascinating, Dr. Green said, waving the scanner over him. Your stress hormones barely spiked during the entire incident. How is this possible? Miller shrugged. Humans are good at judging real threats. The station's hull is rated for impacts much bigger than what we just had. Plus, the debris was mostly small stuff, moving in a way that made it easy to avoid. Now, if you want to talk about really stressful situations, try fixing a broken water pipe during a Chicago winter. That's scary. One of the alien crew members, a floating orb of translucent gas, pulsed with confusion. But the noise, the vibrations, how could you focus? Oh, that. Miller smiled. That's nothing. On Earth, we have these things called thunderstorms. Imagine explosions 100 times louder, with light brighter than a solar flare, happening right above your home. We sleep through those all the time. The aliens stared at him in shocked silence. Captain Blue arrived, his skin shifting through various shades of blue. Private Miller, while your dedication to duty is admirable, we need to establish some protocols. You can't just ignore evacuation orders. With respect, sir, Miller said, pulling up the debris tracking data on his tablet. I wasn't ignoring them. I made an informed decision based on available data. Look, here's the debris field's pattern. Here's our station's position. And here's the structural integrity rating of our hull plating. There was no scenario where this would have caused serious damage to this section. The captain studied the data, his head tentacles curling in thought. You analyzed all this while fixing the recycler. Multitasking, sir, it's a human thing. Later that day, as Miller sat in the mess hall eating his dinner, he noticed the other crew members watching him with a mixture of fear and fascination. The story of the human who calmly worked through a debris storm had already spread through the station. He just hoped they wouldn't find out about his habit of napping during missile tests back in basic training. That might really freak them out. The real battle started just after Miller had finished his evening shower. The station's lights dimmed as massive energy weapons lit up the space around them. The entire structure vibrated from the sonic booms of ships passing too close at faster-than-light speeds. Miller dried himself off, put on his standard-issue sleepwear, and checked his tablet. The battle was bigger than usual. Two major fleets had decided to duke it out right on their doorstep. The station's shields were holding fine, though. Nothing to worry about. His communicator buzzed. "Miller, report to the medical bay immediately." It was Dr. Green's voice, tense with anxiety. Sighing, Miller pulled on his boots. He walked through corridors filled with panicked crew members. Some floated or slithered or rolled their way towards emergency shelters. Others huddled in groups, their various appendages trembling. The station shook again, and a particularly bright flash of weapons fire lit up the windows. The medical bay was chaos. Dr. Green and her staff were trying to deal with dozens of crew members suffering from acute stress responses. Some species had literally changed colors from fear, while others had gone into defensive hibernation. "Ah, Miller," Dr. Green said when she spotted him. "Good. We need your help. None of the crew can sleep. The battle is overwhelming their nervous systems. Even mild sedatives aren't working." Miller looked around the room. "What do you need me to do?" "First, I need to understand how you're remaining so calm. Your vital signs are normal. Actually below normal. Are you tired?" "Well, yeah," Miller yawned. "I just finished a 12-hour shift." Another explosion rocked the station. Several alien crew members made high-pitched sounds of distress. Miller just scratched his head and yawned again. "Fascinating," Dr. Green said, scanning him. "Your body is actually preparing for sleep despite the chaos around us. How is this possible? Doc, have you ever been to Earth?" She shook her head. "Well, we've got these things called cities. Millions of people living together. There's always noise. Cars, construction, sirens, planes, you name it. You either learn to sleep through it, or you don't sleep at all. This." He gestured at the window as another burst of weapons fire lit up space. "This is quieter than my old apartment next to the elevated train in Chicago." Dr. Green's eyes widened. "You live next to constant noise. By choice." "Rent was cheaper," Miller shrugged. "Look, you want to help your patients. Tell them the station's shields are at 98% capacity. The battle is happening at least 100,000 kilometers away. At this distance, we're basically watching fireworks. But the vibrations, the sonic booms, are nothing compared to a good thunderstorm, or a rock concert, or New Year's Eve celebrations back home." Miller checked his tablet again. "The structural integrity of the station isn't even slightly compromised. We're fine." Dr. Green turned to her patients and began sharing this information. Surprisingly, several of them started to calm down when they understood the actual statistics of their situation. "Miller," Captain Blue's voice came through the communicator. "We need you in the command center." When Miller arrived, he found the command staff huddled around monitoring stations. Captain Blue's skin was cycling through stress patterns. "How are you doing this?" the captain demanded. "Every other crew member is in distress, but you look like you're about to fall asleep standing up." Miller tried to stifle another yawn and failed. "Sorry, sir. Long day. Mind if I head to bed? Got early shift tomorrow." The command staff stared at him in disbelief. Through the massive command center windows, space itself seemed to be tearing apart with weapon fire and explosions. "You're going to sleep now." Captain Blue's voice was incredulous. "Unless you need anything else, sir. The shields are holding. The battle's a safe distance away. And I've got preventive maintenance scheduled for tomorrow morning." After getting permission to leave, Miller walked back to his quarters. He could still hear the sounds of battle and distressed crew members through the walls. Setting his alarm for the morning shift, he climbed into bed and was asleep within minutes. The next morning, the stories spread through the station like wildfire. While the rest of the crew had spent the night in panic or medically induced calm, station sensors had recorded the humans' vital signs. Private James Miller had slept soundly through one of the biggest space battles in recent history, even snoring through the loudest explosions. His reputation would never be the same. The day after the big battle, Miller found himself sitting in the medical bay, surrounded by curious alien scientists. Dr. Green had called an emergency research meeting to study what she called the human anomaly. Miller thought that was a bit dramatic, but he'd learned it was better to just go along with things. "Now, Private Miller," Dr. Green said, adjusting various scanning devices pointed at him, "please explain again about this getting used to things concept." Miller shifted in his chair, aware of the dozen or so alien eyes, sensors, and other sensing organs focused on him. "It's called adaptation. All humans do it. Put us in any situation long enough, and we'll adjust." A floating crystal being chimed in confusion. But the battle, the explosions, the energy readings were off the charts. "Sure," Miller nodded, "but they were consistent, predictable. Like I told Doc Green, it's not that different from living in a busy city. You get used to the baseline chaos and learn to ignore it." Dr. Green's assistant, a tall insectoid, was rapidly taking notes. Subject claims chaos can become routine. The very idea seemed to disturb them. "Let me give you an example," Miller said. He pulled up a video on his tablet. "This is from Earth. It's called a rock concert." The aliens watched in horror as thousands of humans packed together in a small space, with massive speakers producing what seemed like weapon-grade sound waves. The ground shook, lights flashed, and the crowd seemed to move as one entity. "Those humans," Dr. Green pointed, "they're sleeping. In the middle of this assault on their senses." Miller laughed. "Yeah, it's pretty normal. When you pay good money for a festival ticket, you learn to nap between your favorite bands." Captain Blue had joined the meeting by this point, his skin shifting between shades of curiosity and disbelief. "Your species willingly subjects itself to these conditions. For entertainment." "Oh, that's nothing," Miller said. "Wait until you see what we call amusement parks. We pay good money to be strapped into machines that simulate near-death experiences." The medical team's instruments went crazy as they processed this information. Dr. Green pulled up Miller's latest brain scans. "Look at this." During last night's battle, his brain actually entered deeper sleep stages during the loudest explosions. It's as if his body interpreted the chaos as a lullaby. "Makes sense," Miller shrugged. "Back in basic training, lots of us slept better during artillery practice than we did on quiet nights. Something about the steady boom boom boom, you know." The alien scientists exchanged worried looks. "But what about the evolutionary advantage?" one asked. "How does sleeping through danger help survival?" Miller thought for a moment. "Well, on Earth, danger is pretty much constant. If we stayed alert for every possible threat, we'd never sleep. So we evolved to be really good at sorting out which threats matter and which don't. Like last night, the shields were holding. The battle was far enough away, so why waste energy worrying?" Captain Blue's head tentacles curled thoughtfully. This could be valuable information. Our troops often suffer from stress fatigue during extended conflicts. If we could understand how humans manage their stress responses." "Oh, that's easy," Miller said. "Want me to teach them?" The room went quiet. You could teach other species how to do this?" Dr. Green asked. "Well, maybe not exactly like humans do it, but I could share some techniques. You know, basic stuff like threat assessment, compartmentalization, power napping. The stuff they teach us in basic training." Captain Blue and Dr. Green exchanged looks. This was unprecedented. A Deathworlder offering to teach their stress management techniques to other species. Private Miller, Captain Blue said formally, I'm assigning you a new additional duty. You'll work with Dr. Green to develop a cross-species stress management program. Maybe we can help our crew handle the chaos a bit better. Miller nodded, then checked his watch. Sure thing, sir, but can we start tomorrow? I've got a maintenance schedule to keep, and there's a coolant leak in Section 6 that won't fix itself. As Miller left the medical bay, he heard one of the alien scientists say in awe, They really are incredible. They turn chaos into routine, and then they just get on with their day. Miller smiled to himself. If they thought this was impressive, wait until they learned about how humans used to sleep through predator attacks in the African savanna. But that lesson could wait for another day. The station's alarm blared with a different tone this time. Miller recognized it immediately. Not the usual battle warning, but something worse. System failure. Critical malfunction in primary reactor cooling system. The station's voice echoed through every corridor. Backup systems engage. Engineering team required immediately. Miller was already running toward the reactor section when his communicator buzzed. Captain Blue's voice was shaking. Miller, the regular engineering team. They're not responding. The battle outside is too intense. They're hiding. On my way, sir, Miller said, checking his tablet for the reactor readings. The numbers weren't good. Send me the access codes. The station shook violently as he ran. This battle was closer than the others, much closer. Energy weapons fire lit up the corridors like constant lightning, and the impacts of debris made the whole station creak and groan. When Miller reached the reactor control room, he found it empty. Through the reinforced windows, he could see the reactor core pulsing with an unhealthy red glow. The cooling system's main pipeline had been damaged by the station's violent movement. Sir, Miller called over his comm, I need to go into the reactor chamber. The problem's physical, not digital. That's suicide. Captain Blue's voice cracked. The radiation levels, the heat, and the battle outside is getting worse. The radiation suit will give me 10 minutes, Miller said, already pulling one on. Should be enough time. Dr. Green's voice joined the channel. Miller, your vital signs. They're elevated, but still within normal parameters. Are you not afraid? Miller checked the suit's seals as he replied, Oh, I'm definitely scared, Doc. But being scared doesn't mean you can't do your job. He paused. Although, what is it? Captain Blue asked. I could really use some music. Always works better with a soundtrack. There was a moment of stunned silence on the comm. Then Miller started humming an old Earth tune as he entered the reactor chamber's airlock. The heat hit him first, even through the suit. The reactor's emergency containment field buzzed ominously, barely holding back the worst of the radiation. Miller moved carefully across the walkway, toolkit in hand. Reactor temperature rising. The AI warned. 5 minutes to critical failure. Miller kept humming as he reached the damaged cooling pipe. The battle outside was creating a light show through the chamber's armored windows, but he ignored it. Focus on the job. Deal with the fear later. Basic human survival trick. 3 minutes to critical failure. The pipe was worse than he'd thought. Miller pulled out his tools and started working, his humming turning into quiet singing. Show must go on. Miller, Dr. Green's voice was tense. Your heart rate is remarkably steady. How are you maintaining focus? Old family secret, Doc, Miller grunted as he wrestled with the pipe. Humans work better under pressure. Literally, in this case. The station rocked with another impact. Miller swayed but kept his footing. The reactor's warning lights were flashing faster now. 1 minute to critical failure. Miller made the final connection, then sealed it with emergency bonding foam. Try it now, he shouted. The cooling system hummed back to life. The reactor's angry red glow slowly faded to its normal blue. Miller let out a long breath and finished his song. When he emerged from decontamination 20 minutes later, he found a crowd waiting. Captain Blue, Dr. Green, and several crew members who'd finally ventured out of their hiding spots. You? Captain Blue's skin was cycling through colors of amazement. You were singing, while fixing a reactor, during a battle. Miller shrugged. Music helps keep the rhythm. My dad taught me that. He was a construction worker. Said you can't let a little danger stop you from doing what needs doing. Dr. Green's scanner was whirring. Your body is already returning to baseline rest levels, as if this was just routine. Well, Miller said, checking his tablet, the reactor's stable, so I should probably head back to my regular maintenance schedule. Those air filters in Section 3 won't clean themselves. As he walked away, he heard Captain Blue say to Dr. Green, I'm starting to think we've been wrong about Deathworlders all along. Their danger isn't in their strength or aggression. It's in their ability to treat the impossible as just another day's work. Miller smiled to himself. If they thought this was impressive, they should see how humans handled Monday morning traffic. 1 week after the reactor incident, Miller stood in front of a very unusual class. The station's largest conference room had been converted into a temporary classroom. His students included engineers, security officers, and medical staff from 15 different species. All right, Miller said, looking at his nervous audience. Today we're going to learn about something humans call power napping. But first, we need to talk about threat assessment. Captain Blue sat in the back of the room, his skin showing patterns of curiosity. Dr. Green was nearby, her instruments quietly recording everything. The big problem I'm seeing, Miller continued, is that you folks are treating every bang, flash, and rumble like it's going to kill you. That's exhausting. So let's start with a simple exercise. He pulled up a display showing the station's shield readings. See these numbers? They tell you exactly how much danger you're in. Right now, we're at 97% shield strength. That's like having 15 walls between you and a raindrop. A floating gas cloud being pulsed nervously. But the noise, the vibrations, that's just your neighbor throwing a party, Miller said. Annoying, maybe, but not dangerous. Here's what I want you all to do. Pull out your tablets and set up personal warning systems. Anything above 90% shield strength gets ignored. Your tablets will tell you if there's real trouble. The aliens looked at their tablets uncertainly. A particularly brave insectoid raised an appendage. But how do we ignore things? Miller smiled. That's where power napping comes in. The human brain has this neat trick. When we know we're safe, we can shut down parts of our awareness, like turning off rooms in a house to save power. He dimmed the room's lights slightly. Everyone find a comfortable position. We're going to practice relaxing during mild chaos. Right on cue, Miller had arranged this with the maintenance team. The station's regular background noises increased slightly. Some ventilation systems hummed louder, and distant mechanical sounds echoed through the walls. Several aliens started to panic, but Miller held up his hand. Check your tablets. Shield strength. Perfect. Structure integrity. Perfect. Now, focus on those numbers. The noise is just decoration. To everyone's surprise, a few of the aliens actually started to relax. One even entered their species' version of a light doze. Good, Miller said softly. Now let me teach you about something we call compartmentalization. Imagine your mind is a space station. Each worry gets its own room. When that worry isn't useful, you close the door. The lesson continued for an hour. By the end, nearly half the class had managed to achieve some form of rest, despite the artificial chaos around them. Dr. Green's readings showed decreased stress levels across the board. Next lesson, Miller announced, we'll work on sleeping through actual battles. But here's your homework. Start keeping a stress diary. Rate each disturbance on a scale of 1 to 10, but only after checking your safety readings. You'll be surprised how many 11s turn into 3s. As the class filed out, Captain Blue approached Miller. This is remarkable. I've already had requests from 3 other stations for similar training programs. Really? Miller scratched his head. I'm just teaching them basic stuff we learn as kids. You know, like how Earth parents teach their children that thunder can't hurt them inside the house. Dr. Green joined them, reviewing her data. You've done more than that, Miller. You've given them tools to understand their environment. The psychological impact is fascinating. They're not just learning to rest, they're learning to trust their technology. Huh, Miller said. I guess that makes sense. Humans are pretty good at using tools to feel safe. That's kind of our whole thing. The Federation Council has expressed interest in your methods, Captain Blue added. They're calling it the Miller Method now. Miller looked embarrassed. It's really not that special. Every human knows this stuff. We had to learn it to survive Earth. Between natural disasters, noisy cities, and all the other chaos back home, we couldn't function if we didn't know how to turn off sometimes. That's exactly what makes it special, Dr. Green said. Your species turns survival skills into teaching tools. You're not just adapting anymore. You're helping others adapt too. Miller checked his tablet and yawned. Well, that's nice and all. But I've got maintenance scheduled in 10 minutes. Same time tomorrow for lesson 2. As he left the conference room, Miller heard Captain Blue say to Dr. Green, "You know what's truly amazing? He genuinely doesn't realize how extraordinary this is." Miller just smiled. Wait until they got to the advanced lessons on sleeping through earthquake warnings. 3 months after Miller's first stress management class, Station Beta 7 received a new crew member. Private Tom Wilson, another human engineer, stepped off the transport ship looking nervous. Unlike Miller's arrival, there was a proper welcoming committee waiting for him. "Welcome aboard," Captain Blue said, his skin showing warm welcome patterns. "I trust your journey was comfortable." Wilson blinked in surprise. He had expected the usual fearful distance that Deathworlders received. Instead, the alien captain was treating him like any other crew member. A massive explosion lit up the space outside the docking bay windows. Wilson jumped, but noticed none of the alien crew members even flinched. "Don't worry about that," Dr. Green said, waving her scanner. "Shield strength at 96%. Hardly worth noting. Though I'd love to measure your stress responses later, if you're willing." Wilson looked confused. I was told this was an active war zone. "Oh, it is," Miller said, stepping forward with a grin. "But we've made some adjustments around here. I'm James Miller, your orientation guide." As they walked through the station, Wilson noticed something odd. Despite the occasional rumble of distant battles, the alien crew members were going about their business calmly. Some were even taking rest periods in the observation deck, watching the space battles like they were viewing fireworks. "This is unusual," Wilson said. "In my last posting, the alien crew could barely function during combat situations." Miller laughed. "Yeah, we fixed that. Turns out humans aren't the only ones who can learn to sleep through chaos. We just needed to teach them how." They passed by a classroom where a jellyfish-like being was teaching a group of new crew members. On the screen was a diagram labeled "The Miller Method of Threat Assessment." "You're that Miller?" Wilson asked, eyes widening. "The one who started the cross-species stress management program." "Guilty as charged," Miller said, checking his tablet. "Though honestly, I just shared some basic human survival skills. The aliens did the hard part. They had to completely change how they think about danger." They reached the engineering section, just as another battle flare lit up the windows. Wilson watched in amazement as a group of alien engineers continued their card game without even looking up. "Chief Engineer Miller," a voice called out. Miller turned to see Captain Blue approaching. "The Federation Council's report just came in. Beta 7 now has the highest efficiency rating of any mixed-species station in the sector." "Well, people work better when they're not jumping at every little explosion," Miller said. He turned to Wilson. "Speaking of which, you've got first shift tomorrow. Better get some rest." Wilson looked uncertain. "Rest? with all this going on. Trust me, Miller said, you'll get used to it. It's actually quieter than that construction site they put us next to in basic training, remember? Later that night, Miller sat in his office, which was really just a corner of the engineering bay with a desk, finishing up some paperwork. The station's night cycle was in full swing, and outside, another battle was painting space in colors of war. His communicator buzzed. It was Dr. Green. Miller, I thought you'd like to know. I just checked on our new human crew member. He's sleeping soundly, just like you did on your first night. See, Miller said, told you it was normal for us. Nothing about your species is normal, Dr. Green replied, but her tone was affectionate. Oh, and the council wants you to write a manual. They're implementing your training program across all mixed species stations. Miller yawned. Can it wait until morning? I've got maintenance scheduled for. A particularly large explosion lit up space. Several alarms went off at once. Shield strength at 95%. The station AI announced calmly. No action required. Around the station, life continued uninterrupted. In the medical bay, a group of aliens was practicing meditation. In the observation deck, some off-duty crew members were playing board games. And in their quarters, both human engineers were sleeping peacefully, their soft snores mixing with the distant sounds of war. Captain Blue, watching from the command center, turned to his staff. You know what he said, his skin showing patterns of pride. Maybe we should rename this place. Instead of Station Beta 7, we could call it the Quiet Zone, his assistant finished. The station where even Deathworlders come to relax. Outside, the battle raged on. But inside, thanks to one human's simple lessons, peace prevailed. The impossible had become routine, and routine had become comfort. Just another quiet night on humanity's most peaceful war zone station.